Good morning, everyone. My name is Alicia Gutchow, and I'm going to talk to you about when there's no button for that, how to use AI to assist your development efforts. So, one of the things we know about any software product is they have massive amounts of features, but there's always a place where we come to an edge case that's on the edge of what the platform can do natively. We have APIs and we can solve it using the APIs, but when there's hundreds of endpoints and we have to write code, it's a barrier. So, how do we learn more about how to use the tools that are available to solve the problems that we might have? So, just a couple of examples that we might be using here. Your security tool detects a compromised account and wants to immediately disable the user, or a nurse's access depends on whether their training is in compliance or not. Or the favorite is the manager says, just give Mary what Jenny has. We know the tools don't do that, but how can we accomplish those things? We can use AI to change the equation and solve problems like this in a much more approachable way. So, one of the things about AI, if you just go to your favorite tool and you just type in, I want to do this thing with ISC, or it could be IIQ, or any product, I have to know a couple of things. I have to know what I'm trying to accomplish, and I have to know how to tell the tool whether it's going down the right path or not. Sometimes I have to help it understand which APIs to use. I have to know how to set up a development environment and write working code. And then I have to know how, when my code doesn't work, how to troubleshoot it and fix it. But with AI, I can start with plain English. I can teach it what I want it to know about, and then it can help automate the rest. If you think about the image of an exoskeleton here, it's enhancing what we already know. We already know what ISC is and how to use it. Now we want to take that to the next level so the AI can make us more powerful at what we're doing. So let's talk about the SailPoint API. SailPoint ISC has a very comprehensive API. There are over 600 REST endpoints across versions. Everything that is done in the UI is backed by an API call, but there's also calls that go beyond what you can click buttons for. And there is a nice website that I'll share with you in a minute on developer.sailpoint.com that will let you walk through each of the different endpoints. You can even test them out live, and you can see what the call looks like and what's expected. But there's 600 of them. So with AI, one of the things that's really cool is SailPoint also makes an open source repository available. And one of the things that's in that repository are all of the API specs. So we can use that OSS API repository to give AI something in a format that is much easier for it to understand. It can get bogged down looking through the website, but it can process the YAML endpoints much more precisely and find more information more quickly. So with that, it can learn every parameter, the required scope, and every response option that could be possible. So we're going to talk about those things today if we were using the API, and we're also going to show how the same thing is possible if you were using one of the SDKs. So SailPoint makes 4 SDKs available that wrap the API. There's one for Golang, PowerShell, Python, and TypeScript. And what these do is take some of the concepts that are harder to handle. How do you do the authentication, get your initial token? How do you handle pagination? How do you handle retry automatically? All of those things are encapsulated in the SDK so that you don't have to actually know how to do that yourself. So today we're going to use the Python SDK just because, but these techniques would work with your choice of APIs that you could use. So in order to follow along with this demo, there are several things that you're going to need on your computer. First, you're going to have to install Python. You need to have at least Python 3.10 or higher. If you already have Python, the command is there for you to verify your version just to make sure that it's going to work. We're going to need to install a number of tools if you don't already have them. You'll need the SailPoint Python SDK that will install through pip. We're also going to use a program called Keyring and a module called Requests to be able to make HTTP calls. And we'll be downloading some files from GitHub from the SailPoint OSS repository. Now, as far as coding tools, you can pick your favorite coding tool that you like or have a subscription with. I'm using Claude Code today because that's just the one that I normally use, but these techniques would work the same for any of the different tools. So the first thing that you're going to have to do, in addition to getting those packages installed on your computer, is you're going to need to get a personal access token. You're going to find this in your ISC tenant on the preferences menu under personal access tokens. Make sure that you give your token a name and, if possible, give it an expiration date so that after you're done with this project, the token can expire immediately. When you are creating the token, the best practice is to give it the least amount of privileges possible. So don't jump to scopes all if you can limit it more specifically. So pick only the ones that you need. Then when you save this, you're going to get the pop-up window with the key, the client ID and the secret in it. Make sure that you copy those immediately and you have a place to store them, because ISC is not going to show it to you again after you click the close button. It's going to show you the name and it will show you the client ID, but the secret will be gone forever and you'll have to make a new token. So be prepared for that when you start. Now, what should you do with the secret once you have it? We want to use the Python keyring to be able to store it for the AI to use. So Python keyring will work with any OS. It will work with Mac OS Keychain, Windows Credential Manager, Linux Secret Service. And it's a tool that will allow us to store the key safely, but also access it when we need it. And just a note, we don't ever want to put the keys in plain text in our code or a file that could be on our computer that might get loaded up to, say, GitHub or shared on a site like Teams. And we don't need to give the AI our actual tokens. We can use the keyring to keep them on the computer where they are accessed, but they are not read into memory. Now, some best practices before we jump over into the actual demo. When you're looking at entering into a process like this, we want to take a couple of precautions. The first thing that you want to understand with AI is how the data access and training work for that particular offering. So there are different data handling and training policies for every vendor, and they can even be different for each tool. Sometimes there's differences between what the policies are for online use or for command line use that we're going to use today, or even based on what subscription level you have. So you need to make sure you carefully review what the policies are, and then use your best judgment to select the best option for your situation. So make sure that you enable the data privacy controls that are available to you. Look to see if your company has an enterprise AI subscription, because they often include different levels of data protection than are available in consumer tools. If your company has a subscription through AWS Bedrock or Azure Open API, they use the same LLMs on the back end, but it's all run within your organization's tenant. So the data doesn't actually go out to the LLM vendor. So you get the same capabilities without potentially exposing your organization's data. And then finally, if your organization has an approved AI platform, you should use that or talk with your support staff about alternatives. Now, some protections that we should just keep in mind as we're starting this kind of development. We already talked about setting an expiration on your personal access token. Don't let tokens live forever if they don't need to. Revoke any tokens that are unnecessary when a project ends or if a team member leaves. We don't want to have lingering access to our tenants out there. It's a best practice to create a separate named token for each integration. ISC will show you in the events the name of the token that was used so you can trace which interaction called it. And then as you're building up your code and you're working on a project like this, we want to make sure that your setup is not committing any client credentials, organization tenant data, responses from APIs, or IP addresses to your source control. So look at the best practices for your particular setup. And just in general, always start with non-production data. Walk through samples before you access this in your production tenant. So that's kind of just a very high-level overview of things that you might need to do getting started. So what we're going to do next is we're going to switch from looking at some PowerPoints, and we're going to look at a little demo of what could happen. And I've already staged this for us just to give us some time. I went into this is a Claude Code session, and I just put it in the little first scenario that we talked about. My ITDR needs to connect to SailPoint to submit a request to disable a user. I want to make a test program to test this out. And that's all the information that I gave it. And then it came back just based on its information that it knows from its searching of the web. It knows that there are some basic things like we talked about. We have Python SDKs and we have TypeScript and we have other things. It knows that we're going to have a client ID and secret. And it did know that there was the difference between the accounts API and the lifecycle, but it's asking us some questions and we can interact with it. And we go back and forth. And it goes and it writes us a little test program that we can use. Now, I want to look at a couple of things. So one of the things as I got down here and I'm ready to run this is you'll notice that it's putting the credentials right in the system in clear text. Well, obviously, or in our code, that's not a best practice we talked about. It's asking, I ask it, I don't have a token. I don't know how to set one up. And if you look here, notice it's taking us under the admin security settings to API management, which is not where we want to go. We want to go to the personal access tokens instead. And so I want to take a minute and look at just what might happen. I didn't give it a whole lot of information to get started. So what things might we find? And I've run a number of trials of this and found that the AI sometimes didn't give me the right results that I wanted. The things like how to handle credentials, not knowing how to go to get the PAT. The other thing, if you look here, you'll notice that it didn't know that while this is the URL for our tenant, that the OAuth token is under the API site, not the regular URL. So this won't actually run if I were to run this. And it is trying to get those credentials like we talked about just from the environment, not actually from a secure storage mechanism. And I found different types of things. It was going to try to disable accounts. It wanted to disable the identity account versus just changing the lifecycle state, and it didn't give me the best results. So I was having to really use the knowledge I had about the APIs and about ISC to try to shape it to help get the result that I wanted. And we can definitely do better than that. So where do we start? So the first thing that we can start with is getting our system set up to be able to use the kind of techniques that I'm going to show you today. So one of the things that you're going to find in my GitHub repository that I created for this is you're going to find this document. And this document tells you the things that you need to have installed on your computer. We need Python. We're going to be using Git, so you need to have that installed. Obviously, we need a tenant and we need a personal access token. And it's going to walk you through installing those dependencies, like the key ring, and then taking the token that we get from ISC and storing them into the key ring securely. It's going to help us test whether our credentials for our PAT are working. We'll have a test script as well. So if we move from tenant to tenant, we can try those things. And then it's going to help us walk through some additional steps that I want to dive into a little bit more. So let's talk about just the first one about the keychain, the keyring. So once you've installed the keyring, there is a little script here that you'll be able to take and run from your environment. And you will store the URL, and it shows you that we do need the one that has your tenant name .api.identitynow.com. The API in there is very important. And you'll save the URL, the client ID, and the secret. And then we have a little test to make sure that our credentials are stored correctly. And then once you put the secret in the keyring, it won't ever actually show you that back on the screen because we don't even want it to get in our browser history with keyring. So what we'll do instead is we could have a little test program that'll be in that repository where you can go through and now use that keyring that you just set up and put your credentials in to connect to your tenant and make sure that everything is good. So that's definitely a good starting point. Now, the next thing that we want to talk about is how do we help our AI, in my case, Claude, how do we help it learn about SailPoint ISC? So one of the things that you know is that we have this really nice library that's out here organized by all of the different API versions. And I can click on any of the different API endpoints and I can find the request and what the different parameters that it can take are, as well as the responses that I can get back. So this is a great site. I can even use it interactively and test with it. It'll give me examples for each different language that I might use. And you'll notice that there is even a command line version and C# included here. So we've got lots of things that we can interactively work with. One of the things I found, though, in preparing for this is my AI was not very good at just saying, go to developer.com and learn about the endpoints and what to do. But the DevRel team has solved that for us. So one of the things that the DevRel team has done is they've built the developer community site. It is all based on code. So behind that site, there are these YAML files that are for each API version. So for 2026, there's this initial file that talks about how it is configured. And then what the different endpoints are and what can be done with them. And then each different endpoint has a file that it tells exactly how the process should work. Now, this isn't very friendly for you or I to read. It would be easier for us to go to the website, but your AI will love this format because it's very easy for it to catalog and to process. So if you remember, we installed Git on the computer. So what we're able to do is we're able to actually clone the repository that has those specifications in there. And there are directions in that getting started file that will help walk you through the exact steps. So that's the first thing. We're going to bring that down to our computer and clone that repository. So that's going to help us out. The second thing that's going to help us out is we can build up a collection of different tools that we might use. So the second thing is for authentication, we know that from the API, we have to make the request through OAuth to get the token. And then in any subsequent call, we have to use the token that we retrieved. So we can make some sample programs that basically show our AI tool, like Claude for me, that this is how I want you to handle authentication and what the best practices are. So these things then become kind of pluggable blocks that we're able to use to make sure that our programs are going to work successfully the first time, which is a great help. Then the next thing that we're going to do, and this will all be in the repository, is each of the command line tools, whether you choose Claude or Gemini or whatever your favorite is, will have a way for you to give it basic instructions on what your job is for it and how you want it to operate. So for Claude, that is a claude.md file. And so this is the one that I built to be able to do this development. So we tell it kind of what we're doing. We tell it how we're organizing things. So in this case, remember I told you that you could clone the API specs. It says it's going to be in a folder called API specs. We're going to put our code in a source folder, and then we're going to have some docs that we can reference. And then we have some other notes about things that we want Claude to know. If I went back and looked at the initial test script that I built here, if you were watching very carefully, let me see if I'll find it. Down here on line 53, my AI, without any training, without any support, went to V3 because that's probably what the highest hit result set is from its learning and also just from Google. But we know we shouldn't be using V3 anymore because it is being end of life this year. So we need to use newer versions. So this Claude, in my Claude MD, I'm telling it that. So we should look for the latest version and see if our command is in that latest version. So I always want to default to V2026 if it's available, because it's going to have the longest life. So I can tell it things like that. I can tell it about when to use the SDK versus when to use the API. I can tell it how those things were installed and how they're configured. I can tell it what I want it to do for things like authentication. And I can tell it some other little tidbits like, oh, by the way, when you use the APIs for ISC, you don't normally put in, if my name in the tenant was alicia.gutchow, I usually can't put that in the API directly. I have to have my ID number. So I can even teach it that you're always going to have to get that ID number first and give it an example of what it is. So that's one file. Then we can also, I've built a second file. I kind of call these, I use these frequently, I call them kind of best practices. So for coding, I could have one. I use my Claude code for lots of other things. I have it make very complex Excel workbooks or PowerPoints. So I have these knowledge articles that I call them that basically talk about the way I want this process done, or tips we've learned. We had this problem. Here's how we fixed it. We can put them in these files so we don't repeat it in the future. So I've made one for ISC development, and it goes through and talks about the URLs. It talks about authentication. It talks about the tokens, the limits on PATs and how we use them, authorization levels. You'll see here, this is, if you look over here, this file, I'm only about a third of the way through of what I can tell it about. So think about the first one is the Claude MD is what we're going to do. What are the basics? And then we can fill in these additional knowledge support articles for how we want to do it. Now, why didn't I just dump all of that? You'll hear everybody, go to YouTube. Everything is about prompt engineering and giving it your instructions. One of the things that's really changing is if we give an AI too much information up front, sometimes we can get it overwhelmed, and that it's really better to give it the specific amount of information it needs and then add on only when we need it. So like in my case, if I wanted to keep doing development, but I wanted to start doing code I've done PowerShell before in another demo, or I want to do it with TypeScript. I want to work on SAS connectors or other things. I could develop these add-in files for each language. And that way, when I'm working with the AI, I can have it call in only the ones that are needed. If I'm working in Python today, I don't want to be confusing it with TypeScript. Or if I'm working on, I can have this process work and help me with transforms. I don't need to tell it about velocity when I'm working on Python. So by adding in these individual files, it makes it more modular that you're able to control what's coming in. And so basically we're enriching what this AI knows about. And we can also not only include how we want things to work, but we can also include more relevant information. When you choose an LLM, there's kind of a cut date of how much information they know. So if you just go to any AI and it doesn't search the internet, it may not know that version 2026 was out there because it was cut off in its training before that time. So we want to make sure that this latest information is available. So now we've given it this really rich context. Okay. So what can we do that is better the next time? So what I want to look at are a couple of different scenarios. So the next scenario that I have, let me show you one more thing that is really cool about building all of this knowledge up. So what if you are new to an environment? You just got hired by your organization and there's a lot of code that's already out there that you didn't write. Or you have SailPoint Professional Services or a partner who has developed something for you, but you want to make sure that you understand it, right? We should always verify and trust that's what's there. I took the little sample that I had about the ITDR, and I told Claude, I want you to write me a doc that explains, in my case, explain it to the security team of how the process actually works. So it could go through my code and produce this nice document about, okay, the first thing you're going to have to do is get your token. Then you're going to have to convert that username that you see from your logs into a number, and then we can actually make the call. And then even put a note in it that we're going to change it based on the lifecycle state, which will trickle down to all the sources in our ISC. So you could use this same idea. I used it here to show how I could hand this off to the other team, but you could also have it talk to it interactively. Claude, tell me how this code works. I want to learn more about this. And then you can give it any particular function or area. You can ask it, well, why didn't they do this versus that? And it can walk you through and help you explain. So it can also be a good tool to help communicate what you have, or even just to learn about the baseline of your environment. So that's also pretty cool. Now, I want to take this and go to a couple of additional scenarios. So here's my scenario. My scenario 2 was the fact that I had a scenario where if there is someone that is a nurse or a clinical staff in a hospital, they have to keep certain training up to date within certain parameters. So think about like their CPR training. If they don't have their CPR training, many hospitals have policies that they have to get it redone within a certain period of time. And if that time period expires, they're not allowed to work until their training has been updated. So I could have a credentialing system that keeps track of all of my employees and which training that they have. So in this case, I have, Cole Aronson is a nurse. They work in the medical surgical unit and they've completed ALS training and it's current. And then I've got Lucy. She works in pediatrics and you'll notice here, she has 2 different trainings. And one of her trainings is expiring and one is current. And then we have Sean, a few lines lower. He has 2 trainings, but one of them is lapsed. So for our little scenario here, the assumption is that if you're required to have multiple training, you have to have all the trainings. Just one training doesn't cut it. And also, we want to help facilitate. If somebody's training is expiring, we want to go ahead and enroll them in the online part of the training that they need to complete before their training expires. So in this situation, we've got a couple of different scenarios. We've got different departments that have different rules. We have different dates. If it's expiring, we want them to get added to the new course. If it is expired, we want their account to be disabled. If it was expired and now is current, we want it to actually re-enable their account. So we have a lot of data here. Now, why don't I just bring all of this data into ISC? Sometimes there's just systems that for various reasons we cannot integrate with. So think about this. If this was the system in your hospital that had all of the data for every user's license, certification, training, maybe they determined that that is too sensitive for us to access, or maybe there is not a network way for us to get to that data. Or maybe this workflow is more complicated than what we want to tackle. So it could be a number of reasons, but we want to track this. Now, how can we do that? We want to have a task that runs every night and is going out and looking at this credentialing data, looking at who is actually active employees from our ISC. We have our authoritative feed from HR. And then we want to be able to have it make the appropriate decision and take the action that we are trying to take. So I'm going to just pull up the correct version of that file. So here you can see, this is what it has developed. It is reading from this training. We're just using a CSV file here because I don't have a real credentialing system, but the same technique would apply if it was a database somewhere. It has the rules that I explained to you. And it's going to go through, and if they're expiring, it's going to create an access request, and it could even send an email to the manager. If it's lapsed, it's going to put them on leave of absence and notify the manager. And we also want to disable their account. So if they're on leave of absence, they shouldn't be logging in. And then if they're completed, as I mentioned, we'll set it back to active. So you can see here that what it has created is a whole process to do this. We have the lifecycle ID numbers that we have identified for leave and active. We have the different entitlements that we want to be able to request. We have a list of departments that require multiple certifications. We have a window for when we're going to enroll the person in the training, how far in advance that could be. And then it has written a set of helpers and then our basic logic of how it's going to pull and process all of these things together. So I built this just from the AI. I did not write one line of Python myself. It wrote the Python for me. And I have a working output. Now, a couple of things. How would I go about writing something kind of complex like this? Obviously, there's a lot of steps here, and I really didn't break it down super far when I was going through it. But think about the different functions. You could say, I have a export from the credentialing system, or here's the query that we can use to access the credentialing system through JDBC, and here's how you access it. Can you build a sample program that shows that we can retrieve the credentialing information? Then you can build another little sample or another section that says, I want to verify that who is active from the credentialing system, are they still active in ISC? So you can have it build that section. Then you can have it layer on the logic that you're giving it or test the logic that you're giving it. And that's a really good technique if we can help the AI know, okay, let's just take this in parts. We've got to read over here. We've got to write over here. We've got to compare these things. And we can get a working program. We can also have it do things like, can you read this and write it out? Now, do I really want my AI talking to all these systems? That's the beauty of the approach that we're using. I'm not going to the AI and saying, Claude, I want you to go access these things. Here is my token, or here is my password. Go log in and retrieve all of this data and pull it back in yours. You'll notice everything I'm doing is I'm having Claude build a script. Claude, build me a Python script that does this. I don't even have to give Claude the real data. So let's just say, for my example, I have that training data that I showed you a second ago that has the different people. It only needs 4 or 5 lines of data to be able to know how to interact with the file or what the different call data is. So I could make up a sample, and I've done this. I will give it just a little sample of who it is, and it's not real data. Claude, this is what the output is going to look like. This is the name of the file that you're going to use. Write me a Python to process this. That way, the AI never actually interacts with the real system or the real data. It's contained on your local system that's running it. So you're not even sending that data for possible review. I can also I can say, Claude, run my program and test it. Or I can just go and have a command line window open and type my Python command in, and I can run it myself and just tell Claude what happened. If I choose the second approach, Claude never sees the actual results either, so it doesn't get any data that way. So there are lots of ways we can use these techniques and kind of isolate the exposure that we have and we're giving the AI while getting the benefit of using the tool to help us learn or expand our capabilities. So I did run this program. So we have some people that you're seeing in the file that are definitely expiring and lapsed, and somebody becomes active. And when I ran it, you can see here, I just typed Python 3, which is my Python command that I use on my computer, and scenario 2, training and compliance. And it went through and it looked at every individual. So in this case, Cole Aronson was current. It didn't need to do anything. On Lucy, it knew that one of hers was expiring, and it sent an email to her manager, Jordan, and said that it sent a request for her to complete her class within 30 days. And then if you look at Danny down here below, it showed that it was restoring the access because now the report was showing that they had completed their training. And it can give us even a report at the end. So I can have it do something that's maybe more complex than what I want to do inside of ISC, or maybe there's a reason why I need to run this from a different system. It needs to be controlled from the credentialing or the training system, not from ISC, but it needs to interact with ISC. All of these things, this opens up a lot of opportunities for us as we're going through. So we can start to solve some really cool problems that maybe initially we're like, how would we do that, right? Without resulting to somebody just getting a report every day and clicking buttons in our ISC tenant. We don't want to have that be the only use of our tools. So I'm continuing to build and expand on the capabilities that I have. So the next scenario I have is the one you either love or you hate, which is I have a new person in my department, and her name is Mary, and she's going to do the same thing that Jenny does. Can you give her the same access as Jenny? Well, if we go into our tenant and we go to Request Center, we know that we have to have the entitlement, the role, or the application that we're going to be requesting. There's no way to say, what does Jenny have? If I'm a manager, I don't have a way outside of certifications to go in and see what Jenny has to get that list. So I'm having to call somebody and try to search this down, or I just do the best that I can and I start to guess, which means I maybe get it right, maybe I don't get it right. But obviously there's organizations that this is important. So I did the same thing. I went to my Claude session now that I've built up this knowledge of how to do things, and I've built up samples of how to interact with certain components. Like in scenario 2, I built how to make an access request, and now my AI can use that for the next program because it's building up its own library of what we've done. So I could have it build this particular program. So I gave it the scenario. On my command line, what I told Claude was, ISC has no native provisioning by example capability. A manager that brings this scenario, there's no way to accomplish this out of the box. So what I want is a script to pull all the roles from the peer And then I want to have it print out a dry run to have the manager be able to review it. What should they request for the new person? And then I want to actually submit. If they like it, then I'll go and run it with a flag that says to actually execute it. So you'll see here that because I wanted two different modes, I wanted a read-only test it out mode and a submit mode. You'll see that I've got some command line flags in the usage. But a lot of the things are the same. How do you get the keys? That's from the key ring that we did 2 scenarios ago. That we want to use the SDK. We're using that information that we had in our best practices about this is more complicated. We want to use the SDK versus the API. So it knows how to do that. So it has built out this script, and it has the ability to go and look. So what does this actually look like? So I ran this looking up Jennifer Thompson and our new person. I ran it a second time. So Mary was one person. Cynthia Cook was a second person. Cynthia is going to be the manager of the department, and she needs to be able to back up all of her people. So it looked at Jennifer's access versus Cynthia, and it found all of these different roles and entitlements that Cynthia did not have. And then in this case, this was just a dry run that said, these are the things that would be requested. And I could go, and if this was appropriate, I could go and submit those access requests. Now, when I submit the access requests, this goes back through all of our standard ISC processes. Whoever was supposed to be the approver gets notified, and they can approve or reject. I had a couple as I was going through this that were creating tasks. I was getting the notification for the tasks that I needed to go and take some action. So I'm not manipulating ISC outside of the rules, right? We have the ways that the tenant is supposed to operate. So I'm still following all of my standards. I'm just not going to the UI to click a button and be able and have it show the results. So we end up with some very powerful capability that is based on just teaching the AI to know about ISC, know about our expectations for how things are done and how they are going to operate. Like, for example, the one that was sending the emails. Do you want it to send an email, or do you want it to, you could send a Slack message, right? Depending on what your organization expects. Now, let's see. So you've seen a lot of the things that I have built. You've seen the framework that I've established of how I tell Claude what I want it to do and how I've given it this additional information. So what I want to do is I wanted to show you, we'll do a little bit of live, and hopefully all the demo gremlins are not watching us do this. So I have a folder here and nothing in my folder. But the way that Claude Code works is my demo folder is part of my dev days folder that I've been working on. And you'll see in there, I do have my Claude MD file that I was telling you about. And then if I look in the docs folder, I have the ISC development guide that I showed you that's kind of my best practices of what I want to do. I also have the API specs that let me go into IDN And then you'll see we can go into the V 2026 and we can look at the paths and we can see all of the different documents that are there. So Claude is able to take all of this information that I have saved. So we can do the API specs. The SDK is also on the SailPoint open source GitHub. So I've downloaded that as well, and it knows how to interact with it to be able to find how to use the particular SDK commands. So I've built up all of this information for my new process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to that demo folder. You'll look in the demo folder, and I'll even do the long version. If I can type, I have nothing in this folder. Now, the way Claude works, and there's differences with different ones, but it's going to inherit those things that I showed you from the top folder. It's going to know how to do things. So I'm just going to run the command and I'm going to say Claude. That's how I start it. And I'm going to say, hi, Claude. Tell me how I should authenticate a new API script to, right? This is something, I just want to illustrate that this is something we told it about. So what it's going to do, you can see it based on the Claude MD, the one that I showed you was in my folder. Here is the authentication pattern. We want to use a personal access token. We don't want to use the client credentials. We want to use a Python keyring. Here's how we're going to import the keyring. And we're never going to import them in script. So that was part of that buildup that I was showing you about. So now we could ask it a totally different thing. You saw all the scripts that I built. I disabled accounts for the ITDR. I did the nurses didn't have the CPR training and they needed to be disabled, enabled, and access requests. And then the last one was clone my access. I've not touched anything about, let's just do certifications. So let's just say I want to, and you'll notice here, see how it's saying, let me check the API specs to find the right command. It didn't say, let me check my knowledge base. It didn't say, let me go Google, right? It's going to that folder that I just showed you that I had downloaded on the computer. You can control what it can access and what it can do on your computer. You're seeing me give it access on each command. I tend to do that because I don't like it to run away, but you can give it more promiscuous access than what I tend to do. So I just have to say that it can do these things. Sometimes I do that because if it does go a path that I didn't intend for it to do, I can just click the no and I can reset. But if I had given it all permissions, it could have gone off for, 5-10 minutes and then I still have to regroup. Okay, so we see it went off for about 25 seconds. And now from the 2026 spec, it knows the endpoint we want to use. The operation is create a campaign. Here's the scope we need for our token. And the user has to be an org admin or a cert admin. And then what it looks like. And then it can do different types of managers. So I could just even say, I need to make a certification if I can type. It's very forgiving if you misspell a lot, which I do. So I'm just going to I just picked the nurses. And I'm just going to say, what would be the steps to code a program like this? Just for time's sake, I'm probably not going to let it go off and build the whole thing because it'll take more than the time we have remaining. But let's get it to give us a list. But I could have just as easily said, okay, can you make a campaign for me? But I could have also just said, okay, can you go find the nurses that are in ISC, find who their manager is, and then we'll set up a campaign for them. All right. It's figuring out which filter. You'll notice, see here, it's looking at the YAML files that we found in the folders from the API specs. And it'll come up with a plan for us of how to go about this. Okay, this is it actually came back with a very good example. So it's asking me a question. So are there identity attributes like job title or department that it can use to filter for the nurses? So then we can answer it, but it already gave us a high level approach. It's going to build a filter. It'll create a manager campaign and use the filter, and then it'll activate the campaign. And then we could also verify it. And we could tell it, no, Claude, I don't want to activate it now. I want to save it and review it manually, all of those kinds of things. But all of the setup and all the preparation that I did so far that you saw from the first ones led to it being able to do something like this in we've been working on this maybe about 5 minutes. So it becomes a very powerful tool, whether we want to do the API, whether we want to write our own scripts. We can use similar techniques for learning about how to write bean shell rules, how to write TypeScript customizers, why our velocity isn't working when we get to that crazy lifecycle state transform and you get that very big if at the bottom. This can help us be able to process that and work through it in a way that is interactive and quite safe. So I hope you can see that this is a very powerful capability to add to your arsenal to help you not only solve problems, but also learn more and build more capability. And also by building out all of the sub-modules, like how do we authenticate, how do we create campaign filters, all of those things, we can also start to work smarter, which is, there's always more work than I can get done in a day. So I like working smart. So thank you for your time and attention today, and go check back to the beginning and get that